Right. So yesterday we really learned about the XML HTTP request object for the first time, and how that's going to be used in the context of asynchronous JavaScript. So JavaScript that is happening kind of as it comes without going line by line. So in our example with XML HTTP requests, we're sending a request to the server. The server can respond back at any time, and we can't wait for that response essentially. And so we had a homework assignment yesterday. I thought maybe as a good exercise, we walk through it together. I do what I would do in this exercise, and kind of show you my thought process. I know we'll kind of go as simple as possible, and then show a little bit more advanced versions because I know that some of you were trying to go a more advanced route. So we'll work through this together and hope for the best. All right. So what I did. I cloned my Git repository where I made the homework assignment. So now I have a folder here. So if I open this up, XHR, great, select folder. Right, so this is kind of where you all started from, right? And we know that we've got, if we go live on this, let's open up live server. Let's make this a little bit smaller. Right, this is kind of what you see when you load the page, right? Nothing too surprising here. Let's open up our JavaScript file as well. And we know that we have 3 files in here in this files folder, page 1, page 2, page 3. But we know we have to write some JavaScript here that will basically, the instructions were when I click a button, it's going to load that file in the background and put the contents inside this div. Okay, so that's kind of where we'll start from. So first, we probably want to write our event listeners. So I'll say document.get, let's say document add event listener. And I'm going to do DOM content loaded, right, so that I can just make sure that everything has been loaded correctly. And then I'm going to go here and say, all right, we know we have 3 buttons, so let's look at these. Page 1, page 2, page 3. So I'll say page 1, page 2, page 3, click events. Okay. So just like with anything else, we'll start with document.getElement by ID. And what I'm going to do, and what I would probably do, because this is how I like to work, is I like to do one and make it work, and then see if there's easy ways for us to abstract this across a bunch of different things. So I would start with this, page 1, .add event listener, and I'll say click, and it's going to take a function, and we're going to go in here and just say like console.log, click the button, and just to make sure that we're operating on the right button and that everything is making sense to us. So that's the direction we'll go. I'll click page 1, click the button, worked perfectly. Great. So what I want to do is I want to create a new XML HTTP request object. So I will say var XHR equals new XML HTTP requests, right? And we just create the object, right? The object exists now. We're going to do XHR.onLoad. We're going to make this a function. And why we're doing this is, this is an asynchronous action. When we make this XML HTTP request object, we make our request to the server. It is going to go out. It's going to fetch the resource, but this server might be on the other side of the planet. It might take 4 seconds round trip for us to get this information. So we don't want JavaScript to wait for this to return to us. We want to have this happen, and when the response occurs, we want to tell our JavaScript, hey, when it's back, let's do something with it, right? So we know in here we're going to have something like, when the data is back, shove the content into, what do we call our div here? Page content. Great. And then we want to do xhr.open, and we're going to say get, right? We can use our little IntelliSense up here. It's going to tell us the first parameter is a string that says get, and the second parameter is a string that says URL, right? So we know our URL is files page1.html, right? And then we do xhr.send, right? So as soon as I click this, right, we create the object, we create a function that is a callback that does something, right? Right now it does nothing, but we can just console.log, the server responded, and then we open the file and we send the request, okay? So I click it, we see that the server responded. Great. So maybe I've forgotten, what is the name of the field that comes back out of this? How would we even evaluate, like, what was the name of the property that will let me go in here, right? So Leah, if you were sitting here and you're like, I know I want to use XHR, you've gotten to this stage, but you want to get the content out, what would you think to log that will tell you some of that information?
What, like, could you just do like console.log, files page one? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, so if you did console.log files page one, right, that would literally print files page one here. We want to know like what what property, right? We know we're working with an XHR object that we've created, right? That we created up here with new. This is our instance of that object. If we wanted to see where the information that when the request is finished, where what field is that stored in? What property will be accessed? How would we go about? What would we log here to like let us debug?
Oh, it's is it a XHTTP response text?
It could be, but how would we know that, right? That I guess that's the crux of the question is if you were sitting here without knowing that it was maybe you thought it was something response information, right? Like, and that one's incorrect. Like, what would we think to debug here? What can we pass to console.log that will let us examine the entire object and let us see what properties we have to work with?
Could you just do XHTTP?
This
Mm-hmm.
I could not because that variable doesn't exist, right? So if I click this, it's going to say XHTTP is not defined.
Oh, I'm done. Hold on.
You're not dumb. This
X,
is a tricky question.
XHR.
XHR? I could,
Yeah.
and this will work in this specific instance because this XHR variable is the only one in use right now. But we could have multiple ones, and we might be echoing the wrong stuff, right? So XHR works here, but another thing that you could do because we are inside that object is that we could also log this, which is a reference to itself. So either one will work here, XHR or this. The problem is if we'd said something like let or if this was some other if we'd created this in a different type of function, like this might not even exist for us here. This variable might be in use with something else. So this is always safe inside one of the functions of the object. It's always going to refer to the parent object itself, which is XHR. So we look at this and we see we want to get all the content out of here. It looks like we have two that have some of the information. One is response text and one is response. Yeah, let's use response text. So we'll say we need to shove it into page content. So we'll say document.get element by ID page content dot inner HTML equals this dot response text. Right? And we can take off these console.logs that we had in here. And now if we click page one, oh cool, it worked. So now we have something that works, right? This works on the single button. So my next step is, okay, this is pretty good. Let's go here and make, we can do page 2, right? And page 3. So it's just as simple as this. And then we just need to change the URLs that we're opening, right? So now if I click this, page 1, I put page 3 twice. Page 2, page 3, right? So that's all working exactly as intended. Now, I see a bunch of opportunities here for making this better. If I make this a little bit bigger, maybe. Cool. The first is, right, we're clicking on the button, and the only thing that changes between these functions is maybe like this URL, right? So maybe what we want to do is, put this URL in an object somewhere. So we could, what kind of jumps to mind is I could say like, let, pages equals, and we'll say, page 1 is files page 1.html, right, and so on and so forth, right? So this kind of jumps to mind as this might work if we can get this variable somehow. So let's maybe try that next. So I've got this button. What do we think we can do if I want to get the word page 1 out of here? Like, I know I've clicked page 1, but how could I get this in JavaScript with the HTML we have? Right, I need to get page 1 out of here somehow.
Dot target.
Okay, yeah. So we can do, um, yeah. Let's just make a variable for it. Page equals e dot target, and then what is the property that will tell us that variable out of there, that attribute?
ID.
Okay. Yeah. So we can do dot id. So let's copy this down on both. Okay, so we're going to have, page should say page 1 on this button, page 2 on this button, page 3 on this button, right? Cool, so then I can come in here and say, we'll maybe say pages, page, right? Simple as that. So whenever we click the button, this variable will be set to page 1, page 2, or page 3, and then when we do our XHR.open, we're saying, hey, give us whatever the value is of this key, right? So we can just copy this down here, copy, paste, right? So this should still work as well, right? Page 1, page 2, page 3. Great, that's working great. What else jumps out is like, maybe we can make this a little easier. Right? When we're looking at this code, right? Obviously the code is the same all over the place. One thing that jumps to mind is we're using the same function everywhere. So we could make this our next thing we would do. We'd come in here and say, function load page content equals function, and we just simply, right? Okay, and so instead of saying XHR on load and then defining this as an anonymous function each time, we just say load page content, right? Same down here, load page content, right? If we're going to have a function that's the exact same code, like, let's use it as a function, define it once, and then pass it. Right, so we can just quickly do this and verify that it works. Load page content. Okay, good. Unexpected token. Where do I have it? Oh, yeah. I need to do, I defined it both ways, which is silly. Right, cool. I use both styles interchangeably. Right, so we got this now, and if I click this button, everything still works, but we only have one function defined that operates on the onload event of all of these 3 XHR objects. All right, what's the next thing that we can do, just kind of to improve our performance? Anything else jumping out to mind? Right? This function is all the same as well, right? So let's do that. Let's just do function, and we'll call it like button click, right? And we say E, or maybe we make this event so it's super clear. And we'll give ourselves a click handler function for each button. Right, so we can literally just copy in this code here, and then replace this in each one. Right, so we can say button click. Same here, button click. And then same here, button click. Okay. Oh, we made it E, right? So we can change this to event because we renamed our parameter here. Perfect, so this should now work. All right, great. So we've written 2 functions that we're using in 3 different buttons. Now, the only thing that I maybe would think would be perhaps a little bit useful, just because I like how it looks, is instead of having 3 separate button clicks, I might want to make a click handler on the element that controls the buttons, right? Like action buttons. So let's just write that really quickly so we can get more practice with our. Right? So we know button click kind of works on the buttons, but we need to make it work if we're putting the click handler on one element that contains buttons. So we're gonna have to get the. But maybe we already did, right? Because we got page out of event.target.id, and we know event.target is the thing that we're actually clicking on. But I would be willing to bet this is going to cause us some things that break, but we can just explore that as we go. So we'll do document.getElement by ID, and we will say action buttons. Oh, here, I'm just going to copy this because it saves us some typing. And I will just change this from page 1 to action buttons. Right? Interesting. So we click this. All right, this is working, but what happens if I click in between here? Okay, undefined, because event.target.id, if we're clicking inside the div, that may or may not work. We need to make sure this is maybe a button. So let's just take a look at console.log event.target and just see what kind of information comes back to us here. So if I click a button, I'm getting a button. Let's just look at event by itself. Let's look at this object on its own. So it's a mouse event. It's telling us that our target is a button. Is there anything we could maybe do? Oh, okay. Local name button. That's interesting. So event.target.localName gives us the word button. Interesting. We could also, right? We could write this one of two ways, right? We can say if event.target.localName equals button, do the thing. Otherwise, do not do the thing. Maybe there's a simpler way, right? Right, so now if we click this and we click in between here, right, like the mouse event is still firing, we're still logging that event, but it's not throwing that error it was doing before. So that's interesting. We got here by going and using a different property of target that we've never done before, which is local name, right? So if we click on one of the errored ones, right, and look at local name, it's not even in here, right? So local name doesn't even exist if we're clicking on one of these ones that is not correct. And so if I click here, let's look at event target. Local name here will say, local name says it's a div, right? So it's telling you the name of the tag here. And so this is one way to do it, using a new property we haven't used before in event.target. Because you can see event.target has a whole bunch of stuff in here, right? All the things that we've learned about way back in like week 1 of the attributes that elements can have, right? We see some area things in here, if you remember some of the accessibility work we've done. But we were able to get like the local name, or we could have used node name, which is the same thing but in uppercase. And we know that we're in a div. Another thing that we could do, right, if we comment this out, right? Let's just console.log page, right? So, click a button, it says page 1, click a button, it says page 2. If we click in between it, it's going to say action buttons. So the problem here is we're trying to go in here and let pages and say, open action buttons, which doesn't exist in here. So maybe all we need to do really is, instead of if event target local name, we can do if pages page. Right? So if there's a value in here, we've clicked a button that exists in our array of URLs, right? Do this thing. So that's one way. Another thing that jumps out as something we could do is instead of defining this, right? We already have the same name here, right? Page 1, page 2, page 3. So maybe instead of doing it this way at all, we come in here and we say, the URL here is files. Right, let's use our new fancy method, files, and then we do page.html. Right, so that should work. Except we don't have a pages array now, so we're going to take that out. Right? And if I click on, one of these buttons, right, it loads correctly, but now we have that error again. Action buttons.html doesn't exist. So I think maybe using if event.target.localName equals button is probably the cleanest way to go about this, without having to create a variable that lets us have our pages. But now we have a function that is doing all of the important information here. It's setting up the request, it's creating the XML HTTP request object, and we have a function that is, and we have a single function that is being used on each and every one of those as our onload mechanism. Okay? Page 1, page 2, page 3, and if we click somewhere off here, right, even though we're still logging it, right, it's not causing errors for us. Any questions? What other things, so we also needed to load this information when the page loads, right? So when you come on this page the first time, right, this is empty. We want to load page 1 by default. So, Andrew, how would you load page 1 by default here?
So you'd want to do it in the window dot or document dot onload.
Okay.
And then just pass in the
What would I want to do?
you would want to, so it would be onload. Could we just set it as onload page 1?
What do you mean? What do you type here?
So it'd be window dot onload.
That's going to be a function.
Okay.
So we're inside an event. This event fires once when the page is ready. How would we load that first page so that when we're in here, right, we're attaching our event here for when we click the buttons. But how would I load page 1 by default?
Do XHR onload?
No, so the onload
Okay.
that you're talking about is an event. It's going to fire when something happens. So we are already in a function that is doing an event handler, right? This is when the page is loaded, right? So that's the first part of this is done. But we just need to cause a thing to happen. So how would I cause something to happen once this event has fired? I'm inside of a function where I can write code to do this. How would I do this?
With an if statement.
Okay. What am I going to if?
So if we could do if the page is loaded, or if
we know the page is loaded because this function only fires when the page loads. So we're inside that event, right? So we can see, console.
So it would just be
page loaded. Right.
So it would just be if true.
Okay. So that's always going to happen, right?
Then
console.log true. Right. What line of code can I write here that will cause page 1 to load? Or multiple lines of code?
I'll be honest, I just copied and pasted the
like this stuff?
Yeah, I just copied and pasted that, but changed open to page 1.
Okay, let's try that. Oh. I like everything to line up. Okay, so page loaded and the content loaded. Great. That did it. This is completely correct. Is there a cleaner way we could do this?
Yes, there is.
Well, what do you recommend, Leah?
Oh, I don't know. I just did that 30 seconds.
It might be a trick question.
Class,
maybe this is the only way to do this.
No, I'm sure there's a better way.
I'm looking at this like this is enough that I did.
I can mess around with it, but hold on.
Right, so
I'm bad at explaining things without being able to do it myself.
So maybe we've already written a function that does this exact stuff. Could we call that function here?
Yeah. Can you put in function hold on. So I put it in a different function. I put it in like window.addEventListenerLoad.
Okay.
Um,
That
like
also would work, right? So none of which event you attach to, whether it's window.load or DOM content loaded, none of that matters. What matters is that we are inside the function, right? We know it's firing. We know that this is loading the code correctly because it worked. What is a cleaner, like, do we have a better way instead of writing 4 lines of code to cause this to happen? Have we already created a function that does this? What do you think, Andrew?
I mean, we did the button click
Okay. You want to try using that?
function. So I know we're not clicking something. So
It's still it's a function. We can call it.
yeah.
anytime we want.
So we could do button click.
So what happens if we run button click right now? We get an error. Cannot read property target of undefined. Right. So I think we're starting to run into this. Right. This is expecting an event object.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we pass an event object in from here? What do we need? We
Yeah.
need event.target.id. We need event.target.localName. Right. We're getting those for free when we click this button. And we know that there's like hundreds and hundreds of other properties in here. But maybe we can just go like var load event equals, and we can maybe say target, and we know we need ID, and we say page 1, and we know we need local name. We make that button, and let's put in load event. We just created a fake event object because we don't need all that other stuff. We just need button click, this function that we made, to run the thing. And all this object needs is event.target.id and event.target.localName. So like, we can create those things, right? There's nothing special about the event object that we can't fake with our own object. Is there a cleaner way, right? So Leah, if you were evaluating this code, what jumps out at you as maybe being like, that doesn't look right, or that smells funny?
like could you scroll up a little bit? What did you call the function up there? Like I would just use. I feel like you just use like button click and just like pass in like a page 1 argument or something. That's what I'm trying to do right now.
So instead of passing in the event, we would just pass in page 1. Okay. The problem is we're using this same function, button click, as an event handler. So whenever we click this button, we don't get to choose what the event is being passed to it, right? So we have to do this because we're using it here. We could write a different type of function, maybe that does both cases. Right? Let's try that. Right? So we can do event. Right? So we're either going to have, this is either going to be an object, console.log type of event. Right? So right now it says object. If we passed in a string here, right, we said page 1 instead. We'll just say var page equals page 1. Oh, excuse me. Let's change this to page, right? So it's string when we pass in this, and it's object if this was working. This would say object if it was an event from the event handler. So maybe we do an if statement here, where we say, okay, so let's just do type of event.target.id. We'll do type of event equals object, right? And we can use our ternary operator and say, give me event.target.id, or just event or page. Event or page. Right, so now we're saying we're going to pass in either an event or a page. If it is an event, if it is an object, so we're getting it from our click handler, we're going to use the target.id, or we're just going to say the page is this. So now down here we can say event or page equals button, right? That makes it so that if we click in between it, it's a div. Okay, so we can say if page we can say event or page equals object and, okay, so that's going to be if it's an object and it's a type of button. And then we can also do event or page equals string or, and we'll wrap this in a parenthesis. This is kind of complicated Boolean logic, so let's walk through this together. So if the event or page, type of, right? If the type of event or page is a string, this will be true, and it'll go on in here, right? So let's just verify this. We can make a variable var event or page equals page 1. So if we copy this in here, right, we can see this is, right? Oh, right? That's going to tell us true. But if event or page was an object, right, that's going to be false. But it's going to say or, which is 2 pipes. And it's going to say type of event or page equals object, right? Object. And event or page.target. So the stuff that was already working before, we're making sure that both are true, right? When we use and like this, it means that both have to be true. So this entire statement is evaluated, right? So if we did this, event or page, and we do target local name button, right? So I'm just creating like an object that would be passed in from the thing, right? So we could use this entire statement and just verify that this works, right? And that'll tell us true. But if this was div, which it is when we click in between it, it's false. Is everyone following along? This is like Boolean. We kind of breezed through this when we talked about it, but we can chain true and false types of statements together with and or. Or means either one can be true. So we're going to put the first one, right? We're going to check, hey, is this a string? Because all we care about is we just need the page, and we're getting this up here. And we're doing this with a ternary. So we're saying, if it's an object, give us the target ID. If it's a string, just use that. And then we come down to our if, which is preventing us from doing this div, right? So if we click this now, right? Yeah, so button click page 1, right? So we don't even need a variable here. We can just come in here and say page 1. Let's take this out. And now it has loaded the page. And if we click on other pages, so this is kind of complicated. I think I prefer passing in a fake object because we just need target, and we need ID, page 1, local name, what was it, button? Right. So this is still going to work because we wrote all this code, but all this code is kind of crazy. I don't think it reads as cleanly. The other thing that really jumps out at me now that we have it kind of working is I'm not sure I'm crazy about this name button click. I might want this to be something more generic, like load page maybe. Load page. And then rather than doing this, we just go back to what was working before. All right, this to me is pretty clean. Does everyone kind of follow along on how we did this? Now, what we were doing before, where we had it like this, right? Like this was also completely fine. It's completely stylistic. You can make 3 separate click handlers attached directly to the buttons themselves and be perfectly fine. And you can also, rather than using this function again, you could also literally just come in here and create, right? This is also perfectly fine. Oh, change this to load page. All are correct. It comes down to how do you want your code to look and how do you want it to feel. And as long as you're happy with that style, then you should be in good shape. Not a soda. Any questions? We're gonna do more XML HTTP requests all day long. We're gonna actually work with a remote server and start to see about how things slow down when we have latency, and maybe we're gonna look at doing multiple XHR type requests to actually populate data on our page. So this is how we're gonna use APIs as software engineers, and it's how we're going to build web products. There's a really cool fake API that we're going to use today as like, let's build something that kind of is real using data that kind of looks real, right? Anyone have any questions of what we've done here in the homework? I tried to make something that was simple, that like let us use a few of the techniques we've been looking at over the last couple days. I know that a lot of you were trying to like turn these into functions and stuff, and that's excellent. Like you were 100% down the right path. I think I mentioned this to one of you today, which is like, just start with this on a single click, and then as soon as you get it working, then continue to build at it so that you can figure out if there's places and room for improvement, right? Because doing it the first way we had it, where we had each individual thing in its own separate function, is also perfectly acceptable, right? Like, this is good code, and having each one in its own individual thing. There's nothing wrong with this at all. Any questions?
You make it look too easy.
You guys are doing great work. I see what you're doing. It's only too easy to me because I've been doing this for 20 years. I still have to look up stuff all the time because I forget a lot. With experience, you're gonna know, hey, I need to use XHR, and eventually you won't have to look up, what do I call first, what do I call second, what do I call third. You're just gonna get a feel for it. So it's more about like learning the patterns and being able to see kind of the big picture of, I want to do X, Y, and Z. Whatever X, Y, and Z is, you'll know I'm going to use this technique here, this technique there. Literally the only difference between me and you is I've been doing this a long time. You are on day one, and I would be willing to bet that if you looked at me way back when this first came out in the early thousands, late 90s, there wasn't even very good documentation back then. So there was a lot of experimentation, a lot of trial and error, a lot of code that we deployed to production servers that didn't work when you were using Netscape Navigator 4. And then you get a bug report and you say, like, how do I fix this? Right? Like, lots of pain. Lots of pain to get here. The Windows way that was originally, like the very first version of XML HTTP request object was actually like this. var XHR equals new active X object ms XML HTTP, something like that. It was crazy. It was actually an ActiveX is an old technology. It was kind of like plugins that you can embed in your browser. And so you were doing this. Everyone that thought this mechanism for communication was awesome was using this version. And so you had to check which browser you're on, and it'd be like, if ActiveX object exists, do this instead. If XML HTTP request object exists, do that instead. So all of our code where we're writing this stuff was like, if XML HTTP request, right? If it exists in the browser at all, do that version. Otherwise, do the other version.
Yeah, I saw that exact thing in W3 School.
Yeah. You don't have to do that anymore. Like, unless you're physically, like, maybe you're working on an oil rig that was built in 1987 and they got old computers. Like, now you can just use one thing most of the time. But it's wild. So, me making it look easy is the same as, like, a professional baseball player where you're like, they're so good, right? They've been playing 20 years. I bet if we were golfing, Andrew, me and my 30 handicap would flailing around in the rough. Cool. Any questions? We can take maybe a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to build something with XML HTTP requests and remote APIs with actual data. And we can figure out how, like, you're going to use this to, like, query a users table and query a whatever table and put all that together into a product that is kind of real. All right? It's 5:46. Let's come back at 6 o'clock. Yeah. All right. So welcome back. To date we've been using the XML HTTP request object, having it make a request to a page and then return content to us. There is another method to do this, and it uses a concept that we haven't really discussed yet called promises. It's a new type of asynchronous function that exists in ES6, but it originally came as like a library in older versions of JavaScript, and everybody liked it. And it was a way to prevent us from having to write all these functions that are callbacks, where we have callbacks nested inside of callbacks, nested inside of callbacks, which you'll really start to see when we dive into the backend programming. But I wanted to like expose this to you now before we go in and actually start using the API, because this is a method that is in the documentation for the API, but you can use either method, right? So they're very similar. So the way that we would use the fetch API is here. Let's just replace this one, right? So we know this works. We click a button, it does this information, right? Oh. Right. So now if I click page 1, nothing will happen. Okay. Even though I've loaded that content, let's take out the default. Okay. So clicking page 1 does nothing right now. Let's have it log this so we can see where we're at while we play along. Move this back over to here. All right, so console.log, click page 1. Okay. So the fetch API is much simpler, but also crazier because it uses promises. So it works like this. It uses the fetch function, and it has the URL to request. So in this case, we will say files page1.html. Okay, that's the first part. This is all we have to pass in to begin with to start. But this object returns what is known as a promise. And a promise is a special type of object that is looking for some event to happen in the future. So it's kind of like a callback, but these callbacks are passing along an event, and we're responsible for doing stuff with it. But a promise lets us use a then function and say, something like, and it lets us pass in two things, like this was successful or this was false, right? So we can come in here and just say, let's put in response, and then we'll use an arrow function, but we could also just easily do this model as well, function response, and we'll say console.log response.json, and that is a function that exists on this object, right? So if we click this now, missing after argument list, that's after console.log, right? Unexpected token. What do we got here in this row? Oh, here. Yeah, perfect. Semicolon. Okay. And so when we click this button now, it's going to use a promise, and what we're doing is we're logging that response. So the promise is that when this is done, we did JSON. Let's just log response because this is not JSON. So I click here, and you can see that the response, when it happens, similarly to our onClick handler, is returning this information to us. But this itself is a promise, which means that we can send this again to another .then, right? So we can say .then, and we'll do what will we put in here? Body maybe? Yeah, probably body. Yeah. And we'll say function data is console.log data. Let's see what this does. This probably won't work because we're not using JSON. It's undefined. How can we use this easily? Body. Let's do data. Body. Let's try that. Readable stream. Yeah, because it's not ready yet. This works really well with JSON because it has a whole bunch of methods in here that let us read and interact with JSON, but it's hard to show off in HTML. Let's see if we can find an example of using fetch to use JavaScript fetch to load HTML content. Okay. Yeah, so this is kind of how you use it. You say, fetch the page, then when the response comes in, return the response.json, or this is the data that comes out of that, but we don't have response. Okay, so we'd use response.text. Let's do that. Text, right? Let's return this. Return response.text. Okay, and then we're going to chain that and do something with the data. So we'll say data function data is and how this is normally written is because these are dot functions, right? JavaScript is going to ignore the new lines, the white space, and so we can show it like this in our code. So we'll say console.log data. Right, so it's going to fetch the page. When that happens, it's going to take the response and turn it into text, and it returns it, which sends it to this next function. Then function data, and we can log that data. So we should see when we click this page, right, click page 1, promise pending, failed to execute text on response, body stream already. Oh, because as soon as you call text, it reads it. So let's take this out. Right. Perfect. So now you can see that this function down here, where we're logging the data, is putting it in here. So we could have just as easily replaced, so document.getElement by ID. What do we call it? Page something. Page content. Inner HTML equals data. Okay. So now clicking this button would do the exact same thing we were doing before, but using fetch instead of XML HTTP request. Now, fetch itself is kind of wild because these are promises, right? So whenever you see like a .then in here, this is what's known as a promise-based event handling rather than using callbacks, right? These are these types of things where we're passing a function in like this is a callback, and oftentimes you'll see this used primarily in ES6 where they say response equals response.text, right? Because we know that our arrow function method is like, here's the argument being passed in and here's the return, right? So if we had our function before where we were just simply saying return response.text, we can shorten this as response.text. Like those are the same. And then this one we can instead of this, right, we could do data, and even though we're not returning, or we are returning in this case, right, it's going to return document.getElement by ID.innerHTML equals data, but this is perfectly valid also, right? So even though it's being returned to our promise, this is a way you'll often see it used in shorthand. So everyone kind of following along with this mechanism, right? It's a little bit easier. You have to know that fetch gives us some special objects like response, which is wildly different than the XML HTTP request object. So it's got its own set of things. So maybe let's do that as an option. Maybe we'll come in here and we'll just say console.log response and just take a look at some of those things. We'll take off this then. We'll click on the page, right? Response has a body used false. So that was that flag that was being set where we tried to do it twice. We tried to read text twice, and it was it was saying, hey, this has already been read. But you'll notice that like this then is only firing when it's completely ready to go. So if we look here at the prototype, this is the prototype of the response that has those fields, right? So remember when we learned about object-oriented programming? The prototype is all these functions that exist inherently on the object, but that aren't necessarily on the object itself. So we can see that the prototype has text in this case as a function, and whatever that function is reading the body whenever it's available, and then probably setting body use to true, so that it won't let you do it twice. Because this is a stream of content rather than this is the full content. Both of these methods, both fetch and the XML HTTP request method, are semi-interchangeable in the sense that you can do both things with both of them, and it's going to come down to how you choose to write your code. I, personally, prefer this because I spent 15 years doing it. This is what I think of in my head of when I want to make a request. But as we're going to see when we actually start doing our little API project a little bit later, all of their examples use fetch, and they work the same. We can recreate the functionality using fetch with XML HTTP request, or if we're really happy with XML HTTP request, we can do it that way as well. So both are correct. Any questions about this? I really want to like show this off first, and then we can go take a look at promises, because promises are a wild new adventure that have some, we can make our own promises. So when we were learning about asynchronous JavaScript yesterday, I skipped over all of this information about promises because it's just like with the other stuff we've been doing. It's the same thing, but completely named differently, and you use them differently. It's still asynchronous. It's just a different way to describe it. It's kind of like the difference between writing our classes like this, right? Like function, fruit. This dot name equals name, right? Versus going in and saying, class fruit, and then building a constructor name. Okay, both of these are identical in the same way that fetch and XHR are identical. You're going to use them in the same places. But like, it's such a complicated concept, I want you to understand it very thoroughly first before we tell you that, like, hey, there's another way. Does everyone feel like they really understand XML HTTP request fairly well? Would you like to dive into promises now, or would you like to save that for maybe tomorrow?
I'm ready for promises.
Oh, okay. One vote for promises. Anyone else?
I mean, what you did earlier definitely helped when you
like wrote
kind
something.
When you expanded it and then kind of abstracted everything. That helped me wrap my head around it a little better.
I agree.
So.
Cool. All right. Then let us. We're probably going to use W3 Schools for this because they have some like really good pre-built examples that will help us explore promises together and maybe make sense of how you'd use them and how we would use it to write asynchronous code. And most of the time, our asynchronous code is going to be us communicating with servers or doing some kind of large-scale processing. So fetch is probably the main thing you'll use a promise for until we get into the back end when we're actually querying databases. We might use promises for that as well. Okay, so let's just go to W3 Schools. W3 Schools. And we will say JS promises. All right, cool. A lot of this stuff is like hard to show off because the event that we're writing a promise for is happening instantaneously, when in reality most of the time it's going to take a second or two. And so it's really easy to see like the relationship between this took a little bit of time and our thing still happened versus I clicked a button and it instantly happened, which is what we've kind of been struggling with up till now. Come on. Why is this page not loading? Alright, let's look on Google and see if Google gives us better results. JS promises. Alright. Let's just look at some of these resources and see if they give us some help. Alright. Okay. Okay. Perfect. Let's use this as an example. So, the promise is itself its own object. So we're gonna say, the variable is promise, or whatever we want to create it to be, and it's gonna be new promise. And it takes a single argument, which is a function, which is gonna have two arguments. The first argument is gonna be a resolver, and the second argument is gonna be this failed, right? So if something is true, the resolver fires. If something fails, the other thing. So this example is really good because it's using set timeout to introduce that delay. So if you click on this, right, in 1 second it clicks done. So this is a really clean example to play with. Let's see if it lets us. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. So let's make this 500 milliseconds. So it's going to happen in 1 second, right? So resolve and reject are nothing more than special functions that are already built into the promise mechanism. And so when we create a promise like this, we're saying, hey, this is the promise. It's going to happen at some time in the future, and we're going to run this little bit of code that will execute. And when it happens, we are going to tell so I can come in here and say reject, right? Done, and it's still going to alert. Let's do confirm. We'll change this to a confirm box so that it shows up as different, right? So now we get an OK and cancel. So you can see that whatever we write inside of our promise, inside of our function, rather than what we've been doing before was declaring, some event has happened and here's the function that will fire at the end. This kind of flips that model around and says, here is the function that is going to run when this thing has happened. So, and we do this by doing then. All of these are chainable, right? So anything that can handle a promise can be called with then. Let's see if there's a good example of that, where we can chain our thens. Actually, it's so hard to show off without good real-world examples. Maybe we'll just use it a couple times because fetch uses promises when we're playing with our API project. Let's see if W3 Schools examples are any better. Good thing, bad thing. Let's try this one. Alright, so in this example, we've got a function that is going to put the word sum in this inner HTML. And sum is going to be either OK or error. Okay, because remember that the promise itself takes two arguments in the function, the good path and the bad path. And so we're able to tell, when we create a promise, we're saying sometime in the future, one of these two outcomes will happen, right? And so when we do a then, it has two arguments, which is a good value and a bad value. So in this example, let's add a set timeout in here so that we can come in here and make this happen slowly. We'll do a set timeout function, and we'll maybe put all this in here. 1000. Let's see if this slows things down. Okay, cool, that worked. Right, so when we click run now, obviously the word OK does not show up. We can put anything we want in here. OK, this is success. Right? And so a promise just lets us control the flow of when things happen in the future. It's the exact, the problem is we're using still kind of, we're mixing both metaphors in this example because we're using a set timeout, which is using kind of the callback infrastructure. But what we've got here is that the callback function itself that we're calling, if we assume that this was going out and receiving some information from somewhere on the internet, we're saying, hey, this is actually a promise, and it's going to do some complicated thing. If the value of x is 0, we're going to send the success option, which then the then function knows what to do with, right? It says then my displayer value or my displayer error, right? So it's still calling the same function, right? We could have this be function error function, and we'll say error message. And instead of document, maybe we do a couple of these, right? And we change this to error message, and then maybe we also say document.get element by ID demo.style background color equals red, right? So when we create our promise, right, this does nothing by itself. If this was gone from here, right, nothing is firing. Even though we've created a promise, the promise does not execute until we tell it my promise, which is our variable, dot then do a thing or do another thing. Okay, so if we click run now, right, we're going to see, okay, this is a success. If I change this, or if I change the value of x to be like 2, right, then it's going to give us our false error in 2 seconds. Yeah. I don't know why it didn't change the background color. That's interesting. Let's inspect this. Interesting. Oh, because we're still calling my displayer instead of my error function. Right. Perfect. So now this should be red, right? Error message. So we can, in theory, chain a bunch of promises together, because a promise is taking a function that has 2 variables here, right? So we could say let promise 2 equals new promise function, and we'll say resolve reject, right? And maybe we come in here and we say set timeout function, yeah, and we'll give it 2 seconds after that. We'll say we'll just do my displayer, and we'll put in a message ourselves, right? We don't need necessarily. Well, let's just call resolve. We'll say resolve. Good stuff happened 2 seconds later, right? So, we're not going to have a reject option in here, even though we have it. But we're just, for the sake of prototyping, to show how these thens chain together. We can do then. How do we show this? How do we show off chaining correctly? Does it have an option? And let's search for this. Let's look for Google promise chaining. Oh, so it's whatever's returned. Okay, so let's do that. All right, so we didn't return anything here. So let's return something. So we can go to then. Oh, we call the error version. So let's make this 0 real quick, and we'll say then function data alert data. Okay, so what we've done here is the promise that we wrote originally, this first thing, if we return something from this function inside of our then we can also use another then, so that we're gonna wait for that first thing to happen before we do something with it, right? So it's gonna say okay in 2 seconds, and then it's gonna alert. So it broke. Gosh. I'm missing some syntax here. What we got here? Oh, I forgot my parenthesis. Perfect. So in 2 seconds it should pop up the thing, and then it said, okay, this is a success. Why did it go in that order? Oh, because it goes backwards. Gosh, this is so hard to show off in a live example. Okay, we're gonna call an audible here, and we're just gonna use fetch to show off promises because that's like a real world example, and all of these examples are kind of stupid. But we can create promises, and when we start learning back-end JavaScript, a lot of the back-end stuff is going to be given to us in the form of promises, right? So it'll be like fetch information from the database, and then you do something with that data. So that will be how we use that in the future, probably starting next week or the week after when we get into more of the back-end stuff. Okay. Now, switching gears a little bit. Up until now, we've been going out of our way to make sure that we don't have errors on our code. Okay. One good example of this is we spend all this time making sure that if event or target.localName equals button, right? Like if we didn't have this code in here, when we were clicking in this box, right in here, where did it go? Did I save this page? No page. This is working. What happened? Oh, because we didn't put it on the. Let's turn this back on. Okay. So when we had this before, right, we were creating this error. It was giving us a crazy error message. Other things that we would do that sometimes cause errors was, when we had our original array up here, it was like var let pages equals, right? It was this array of information here, and we had page 1, files, page 1, HTML, page 2, files, page 2.html, page 3, files, page 3.html. Right. We can add a third button here for the sake of like making this real apparent. Let's make a page 4. Page 4. Right. We don't have page 4 defined, and so clicking on this is going to cause us an error. Right. Not only is page 4 not a page, right? Because we still have the code that lets us. Right. Good. This code. We were doing it the old way where we were saying give us this value, and we were saying page equals pages, and then instead of using our fancy string, we were just putting page in here, right? That was looking in here for the value that was coming in from this event target ID and looking it up, right? So if we click on this now, page 4, we're getting undefined in here, right? And so these are problems for us. It's maybe causing, maybe we've done something simple like, var num equals 10 divided by 0, right? This should cause a divide by 0 error. Or if we did it here, let's say 10 divided by 0. Oh, it's going to give us affinity. Let's do like 10 plus, and then that. So unexpected token, right? That's one that comes up pretty often. Or something was wrong or malformed with our code, right? We see these kind of warnings in our console all the time. So there is a way that we can trap these errors and prevent them from happening, and then do something special if we detect one of these, right? And so that way, we're going to use it for a lot of these. We're going to use it for a lot of these functions and for a lot of these APIs when we start using them. And the way we do that is with a try and catch block. So what try does is that by default, if I was to come in here and say 10 plus, and then right, so we know that this is invalid code. It just gave us uncaught syntax error, unexpected token. Try is going to say, I'm going to try to do this. Okay, it still shows us an error, but we have the option now to say catch e and say console.log error was trapped. Right? So this should work. Maybe it won't work with this type of let's try something that fails. Let's probably have a good example in here. JS try. Yeah, okay, perfect. Right, so they have a function here that it's like add alert. So that's a great example. We'll steal this for ourselves. Right, so rather than being a syntax error, which is breaking everything, you know, we can see that if we had like a ASDF and we try to call it, right, uncaught reference error, ASDF is not defined. So if we put this in a try block, it actually might still display in the console anyway. So let's try this, right? Okay, it's going to hide that error from us, and it's going to tell us, right, the catch has a parameter, so we can, in theory, log that value. Right now we just said error was trapped, but if we go console.log e, because that's the function, or that's the parameter that we're sending, it's going to be that exact same information that was just pushed to the page, right? Uncaught reference error. Uncaught reference error, ASDF is not defined, and then at anonymous, which is this console, line 17. So try catch is really useful. You know, we could use this around our pages, right? So let's right, we were page 4, right? Cannot get undefined 404. We could try this. Let's see if this works. Try. We'll wrap everything in here in a try. Catch e, and maybe we say console dot warn. You know, the page didn't load. Did not load. Okay. Let's see what happens here. Why is this not working? Oh, because it's on the on load. Let's try it in there. How do we do this in a real world example? I'm trying to think of like a way we can show this off other than the simplistic try and catch we did here where we had an undefined function. I don't really think there is any good ones. Maybe there's some better ones in here. Anyway, oh, okay, that's perfect. Yeah, okay, so we can use try and catch ourselves. Let's maybe do this now, right? So when we're doing this information here, right? So we've got you know, we've got this load page function, and we know that we need to check for things like, you know, does this page exist in here? We might want to create our own errors so that we can catch them and trap them and do things with them later. So let's show this off as an example. We'll come in here and we'll wrap this whole block in a try. So we had this already, right? And we know we're going to want to catch e's, right? Catch some errors, and we can call this whatever we want, catch error, right? But what we'll do is we'll say, if page is undefined, right? Or we can even just say if not page, right? So if not page, instead of erroring, which was happening before, right? If I click on this, right? We know that we're getting undefined, and we're saying there's a 404 here. We instead, right now, say throw page does not exist. Okay, so throw is immediately going to jump out of this try block and catch things in here. So we'll say console.log, we caught a bug. Okay. So instead of causing an error, we have now thrown an error that our system can catch later on. So the cool thing about this is that we don't have to catch it necessarily, right? So, right, we've got load page. This try block is throwing, we can do catch, so it does require unexpected token. Maybe that's just a Java thing. Let's do, all these other pages load, but if we click on 4, our try is throwing an error that our page is getting, right? And we can even maybe say, How do we use this in a good example? Can we catch this elsewhere? We can also try. Let's try this. Try load page, and we'll put in event target ID page 7. Right? We know that one doesn't exist either, and we'll say yeah, perfect. Let's just do this for now. So we're passing the event. Right? Catch E console.log. We are here. Okay. If I click on page 4, right? Okay, so it's this try is thrown. Okay, so let's take this out. Right? Maybe that's a better way to do it. Oh, cool. Caught an error. Right? So we can, in any of our code where we're causing errors, we can throw errors. We can so if you use the throw keyword, we can include information that someone in the future might want to use to trap that error and prevent some behavior from happening. So up until now, we've been going out of our way to like return false and things like that. What we should maybe start doing is throw errors whenever we have a problem, so that if this was not wrapped in a try, but we've like this, we're calling load page here, and load page is going to throw that because this doesn't exist in this page, right? We're going to get uncaught page does not exist, right? So it's telling you we did not catch an error, but that was thrown. So sometimes systems will throw errors, and it's up to us to put them in a try and a catch block so that we can capture that information and do something about it, right? So we might make it so that anytime, what you might use in a try catch block, right? So you're going to say, I'm going to try and load this function, and if I catch an error, right, I want to actually load page, with a target that we know is good. So instead of target ID page 7, we just do target ID page 1. So now you can see if I click page 4, that one's right. Yeah, so we would need a try catch block in here as well. Yeah. So it might be better to write it up here ourselves, right? So we could say, if not page, instead of throwing, we'd probably write it a different way. Okay. Be aware that there is a try and catch block. That's where we're going to leave it today until we get to real world examples later when we're using the backend, because lots of APIs and libraries will throw errors, and some of those examples is stuff that we're seeing here, like if I type in ASDF, right, and I say that this is a function, right, we're going to get a reference error that is being thrown by the browser saying ASDF is not defined. Now, often we're going to write code ourselves so we know what we're going up against, but a lot of libraries have gone out of their way to say, hey, if this failure event happens, we're going to throw an error. So oftentimes you'll want to wrap a lot of your code inside of a try and a catch. This is also extremely useful as you transition to other programming languages. Java comes to mind. They throw things all the time, and you're almost always going to be like using try and catch blocks exactly like this to trap those kind of errors. It exists here in JavaScript. When we get into the backend stuff, a lot of those libraries will throw errors as well, and so we'll have to get in the habit of knowing. So anytime we get an uncaught reference error or we get a whatever uncaught, if you see it like this in the console, we can always wrap it in a try, and then what catch will let us do is do something different. So instead of actually erroring and stopping our program from working, we can trap that error. Yes? Any questions about this? It's sorry for like this. This is super hard to show off because it's hard to write code that doesn't work. Cool? Alright. Selena's back now. So we can go back to our previously scheduled plan and write actual code that will tackle an API in like a very realistic real world scenario. So this is going to simulate how we would build something when we are working in the back end, okay? So first, let's take a look at our data objects. So this is a really cool website called JSON Placeholder. I just found it by searching Google. It was something like placeholder API for JavaScript, right? Something like that. Yeah, and it was the fourth one down here. It's free for us to use. And basically what they do is they've mocked up all this data that lets us call these URLs as if they were, how we've been using XML HTTP request object to fetch some stuff. And what they've done is they've given us a website, they let us make requests to it, and it's full of all kinds of just fake JSON data in here so that we can play with it. But they've also gone out of their way to make the fake JSON data that's in here match like realistic real-world models, right? So they've got a users object, they've got a to-do list, they've got some photos, they've got, the photos all belong to albums, and they have some really good documentation here showing kind of how you'd want to use it, right? So when you're using APIs in the future, you might say, give me the posts. This would be a list of all the posts. If you say, give me post number 1, it's going to give you just the first post. If you say, give me the comments for post 1, it's going to give you the comments for that. So we can use this to simulate what we're going to do in the real world. So I thought it would be a really cool exercise to tie in our XML HTTP request object to build basically like a blog type website, right? We're gonna pretend that this is a real thing, this server really exists, and we're gonna build this today using this. Maybe we'll take a look at some of the other ways we can work with this. And the reason we wanted to point out the fetch object is that their examples in their code are saying, hey, run this, right? They're using the fetch API, right? Which if we did this from here, right, just to show that this is, right, if we did this from our console, I like that, uncaught reference errors and stuff. Let me get rid of this. Let's go back to how we were. Good. Fine. Everything's working now. Good. If we paste this in here, right, it's going to say fetch JSON placeholder typecode.com to-dos 1. Then it uses the promise response. It turns it to JSON. Then it logs that to us, right? So if I run this right now, we're going to see the promise was pending. Now it is done, and it outputted that JSON object, right? We have been using the XML HTTP request object, which we can verify with new XML HTTP request, right? And then we can say XHR dot on ready or on load function, and we'll say console dot log this dot response text dot let's just to be, we'll say JSON dot parse this response text so we know we're getting JSON back. Okay, so that is our handler for when it's ready. And then we'll say XHR dot open, and we put in get, and we say the URL is this, and then we say XHR dot what is it? Send. Yeah, and so it's doing the same exact thing. Fetch and XML HTTP request are two sides of the same coin. They're just written differently. So it's going to come down to like style and preference for what you prefer to do, right? So we still get that same object. So what we're going to do is we're going to start building a blog using some of the data options that they have available to us here, as if we were working with a real server, right? So maybe the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open this and maybe make a brand new project. So let's open folder. Let's make a folder, and we'll call it API blog project. And we'll select it. Right? Just like with everything else, we're going to make all the folders we expect. Right? So we're going to have a CSS folder. We're going to have a JavaScript folder. Cool. And then we'll make a file. We'll make a file here called index.html, and we will use our template here to say like blog something. Right? And then we're going to come in here, we're going to make a JavaScript file, and we'll call it like blog.js. And we'll make a CSS file that is blog.css. Cool. So we're pretty comfortable making new projects like this kind of structure makes sense to everybody. Cool. So we're going to include our scripts. Script source equals JS blog.js. and we'll say defer here so that we're just extra careful. And then we'll load our link rel equals style sheet, and we'll say href equals css blog.css. Right? So we're all caught up. Come in here and we'll say h1, blog. And we'll say like articles. Right? So the page we're on is going to have articles on it. And so if we load up our live server, open with live server, right? This is exactly where we expect to be. Everything is unstyled, looks terrible, but we're in a good spot to like start experimenting and playing with APIs, right? So generally what you'd want to do, right, and this is one of the reasons why having multiple monitors is a great idea, is that you're probably going to drag this over into monitor 2, like your documentation here, and you're going to have that up and ready to go so that you can look at this at any time. But we're going to have to just kind of swap back and forth as if we were playing with multiple monitors. Got it? Let me pull up my other page. Right? Good. Let's put these back in the tab. Okay, cool. So, the first thing we want to get is we know we probably want all these posts, right? That's the thing that like makes the most sense. If we're looking at the front page, we're going to want all these posts on there, and then we maybe want like a list of comments that go with each post. So let's start from there and see if we can just start building this out. Maybe we need to style this a little bit to make it less painful to get started. So we'll just come in here and do all the default kind of stuff, and we'll say like font size 16 px, and we'll say border margin 0, padding 0. And we actually probably want to put this in the body. Anyway, let's just give ourselves like a nice background color. We'll make it like 333. We'll start with charcoal and see where we go from there. We're kind of overusing this color scheme, but fine for now. All right, let's actually change that so that we're not good. Then we'll say font family. And we'll say Arial. Cool. All right, so we've kind of got a placeholder. We've got our H1 up here. Maybe we want to come in here and say H1, and we'll say margin left, 10 px. Right, so a little bit of padding. All right, in our index.html, we know that we're going to need some places to put information. So maybe we'll do section, and we'll give it like an ID of articles section. Cool. So this will be our div where all those articles go in. Okay. So let's just give this a different background color. So we'll say section articles, and we'll say background color. Let's make this light and change the color here so that we kind of reverse things. Right, so perfect. So if we had some content in here, right, like hello, right, we're going to see that we've got this this element here, and we probably want to put some padding around this, or some margin here, right? So like we'll say, hey, we're going to put 5 px top and bottom, and maybe 20 px on the sides. Maybe we want to say border 1 px solid black, just to see what that looks like. And then maybe we want to say like height is like 80 view height. Right? Cool. So we've got like this open page where we can put content in. I'm not crazy about this white. Let's maybe make this like I don't know. Let's do 333. Let's keep it the same for now, and we'll maybe leave ourselves a note to let's change this. See, like this. We know the styles and colors aren't what we want them to be. We'll change this back to white, and we'll maybe say instead of a black border, we'll make this a white border. Right? Okay. So it's not perfect. We're not designers yet, but we will continue plugging away. Right? So we've got kind of where our JavaScript is going to load stuff. So let's just start playing with this functions, with this API. So let's say, when the page is loaded, load a list of articles. Add those articles to the page. Right? So that's the first thing we want to try. So, all right, we know we need an event, so we'll just do document.add event listener. We'll say DOM content loaded. right? Kind of our default go-to thing. And we'll come in here and say, okay, you know, we need to, okay, so when the page is loaded, let's put this in here so that we know we're doing this when the event has fired. And we'll say, okay, call articles API. We're going to want to loop through the results and then create an element for each page, or for each entry, right? So that's kind of like the default thing, the three things we need to do. We know that there is an endpoint we can call. We can make a request to this. It's going to return this big object. If we turn it into JSON, it's going to give us an actual JavaScript object that we can start looping through, right? We know how to loop through an array, certainly. So let's start there, maybe. So let's just call, we know, yeah. So let's just grab this and see where this takes us. So let's do var, let's let XHR equals new XML HTTP request, okay, and we'll say XHR dot onload equals function, and in here we'll maybe just do results equals this dot response text, and we know this is JSON, but let's turn this in. So we'll do JSON dot parse this dot response text. So when this runs, we'll be ready to go. And then we'll say XHR dot open. We'll say get, and then the URL that we need is this one, right? We pasted it from that API, and then we'll say XHR dot send. Okay. So when the page loads, we're going to call this, and we're going to put this in a variable. So we'll just come up here and say let results equals right, empty object. Okay, so we're just kind of giving ourselves a placeholder. And what I probably would do here is, even though I know I'm putting this in results, I can type it in any time. Let's just make sure that we're good and say console.log results. All right. So if we pull up our developer toolbar, right, we get an array that has 100 items in it. Okay, that's a lot. But let's just say, you know, the very first thing we want to do is, so I just want to, let's print out the first 10. All right, so we can do this ourselves. So just as a prototype, you know, I'm probably going to come in here and say, all right, we're going to assume that we're going to have some kind of pagination. We haven't built pagination yet, but we know we've got this object. It's in results now, and we can verify this. You know, we can come in here and say, you know, results. That's that array. So maybe we just want to go. Okay. So we've loaded this information, and maybe what we do here is we say, you know, put. Right. So we loop through results and create an element for first 10 entries, right? So it's the same stuff we had as our comment down here, but we want to do it when the content is actually available. So we're just moving that up inside of here. So kind of the first pass in this, you know, what jumps to mind is if I'm going to do a loop and I want to do only a few of them, maybe I'm just going to use a regular traditional for loop. So I'll say, you know, let I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus, right? Right now we can count this and we can just verify that it's working. So we will we'll say yeah, you know, normally we've been going like results.length. That's going to loop through the whole array. We don't need that to happen. We just wanted to go through the first 10. So we probably will have to write a thing, you know, check to make sure that there is a value. Okay, and we'll just kind of label that as a to-do item for us, to do. If we don't, like, if we had said, hey, you know, 1,000, right? If we want to display all the entries, there's only 100 in here. So when we, you know, 101 through 1,000 is going to throw some kind of error to us. So we are going to want to, we're going to want to trap that error somehow. But for now, let's just see if this works for us. So let's do, let's just do document.getElement by ID. And what did we call this element? We said it was articles dot inner HTML equals, let's write each of them out, plus div and then plus, we'll just do here results I dot, we'll do JSON stringify, right? So we can do JSON dot stringify results I. So each of these elements in this array is its own object. So we're going to just turn that into a string so we can see it as it goes. Yes, Leah?
Is there a way to shorten what you did just then? Like when you did document.get element by ID and an HTML equals, like, and then you did it again. Is there a way to, like, shorten that somehow? Because I've had to do that a lot, and it always feels gross whenever I have to, like,
Yep.
repeat
There's
the same
two
thing.
ways. The first is that we can use the concatenation operator like this, plus equals, which is doing the same thing. The other thing that really jumps out at me is that when I'm working on a project that I know I'm going to be working in all the time, I'm almost always going to come up here and say like helper functions, and I'll say like function get L, and it'll be like ID, and maybe I might make an actual function that does a whole bunch of really cool stuff in the future, but for now I'm just going to say return document.get element by ID, and so then I'm also going to come in here and this is just going to say get L. Right. So those are like the two things I'm going to do almost all the time. Plus equals for sure. Right. So now you can see it's doing exactly what we expect. If we inspected this, right, it's going to show us we've got 10 divs in here now, and each div has information in here. Now we're probably going to want to come in here and maybe put in class equals article so that we can give this a little bit of styling. And so we'll say something like div article, and maybe we'll come in and actually put in like margin 10px, padding 10px, right? Just to, like, we know this is not what our final styling is going to be, but now we can see that we've got some information here that's interesting. I'm probably also going to come in here and say, I know I'm going to want to fix my view height stuff, and I'm going to make this design really nice later on. But now that I've got some content in here, I can just let this do its own thing, and however much content is in there is going to expand correctly. Okay, so but what we see here is that we've got our argument. We can verify that we're working with an API. It's happening on the internet. So what jumps out is like, all right, we've got a title value, and we've got like a body thing. So I'm going to maybe use this as an opportunity to let's think of what our styling is going to be for these elements. And so I'll probably come in here and let's just like style one as an example first. And so maybe I'll come in here and actually use, like article as the thing, right? So we'll, instead of just putting a div, we're going to use an article tag. So that's more semantic. And then maybe each of these is going to have an H2, and we'll say like title here, right? H2. And then maybe each of these will have a paragraph, right? So the body will be like lorem 25. And we'll do Alt-Z so that we get word wrap. So to me, like, all right, now that we've got this thing, right, we've got title here and then we've got a paragraph, like that's what I think this style should be. Okay, perfect. But now we notice that, like, okay, this article is kind of smushed up against here, so we probably want to come in here and give us, instead of our current like little hacky thing, we're probably going to want to do article, and we'll say margin 10px, padding 10px, just to get us like a parity with the thing. We probably also want to do border bottom. We'll say 1px dashed FFF. So now you can see we've got like a little line in between these. So if we copied this same kind of style per HTML, right? We can do this. We already kind of know how to do this, right? We can come in here and say, this is a string. This is one of our template strings. So we can say like var article TPL equals, right? So we made ourselves like a little template, and then we can come in here and put in, maybe we'll put in body and title. Okay, it's just using that same the single backtick, and we said, hey, article TPL is a variable. It's going to have, a title, a body, and we can even compress this, right? It doesn't have to be on multiple lines. It's just easier to look at maybe. is still HTML, but we know that like as we loop through this, title and body, we can get this by just saying results I dot body, right? Say var body, or let's do let body equals. We'll come in here and say let, okay. And then we can say let title equals results I dot title. Okay, and so now instead of doing div class article, we can do article GPL. And now we have a whole bunch of articles in here that use that style that we just spent a little bit of time building. And we can see that like it's got an H2 and it's got a paragraph. Cool. So we're like kind of halfway there, right? But we also know that each one of these has its own list of comments, right? And so we knew that we can get like, so this is post ID 1. If we do post, excuse me. Their example was that you can do post 1 comments, and this has an array of comments that can belong to it. So that's pretty interesting. Do they have anything in their documentation that would tell us how many posts are in there? Let's see the guide. Getting a resource listing. Cool. So this API obviously is, if we were building this as a backend service as well, we probably want to be able to have just a count of the comments, so we don't have to do this the arduous way. But let's just try this with the functionality that we have, right? So we know that we can come in here. We have an ID, right? So we have let ID equals results I dot ID. All right. So we also know that if we have this URL, right? We also know that let's say fetch count of comments, right? And we'll just paste this in here so we know that it's like ID comments. Okay. So this is like the beauty of asynchronous JavaScript, right? So we've got all this information. Maybe what we need here is we need a like a placeholder for comments. So we'll say like let's just make it a span, and we'll say ID equals ID comments, and then we'll say like dash comments, right? Because we know we're going to fetch this information and put it on the page, right? So each of these load with dash comments, and they have the ID in here, right? So it says 1 comments, 2 comments, 3 comments, 4 comments, right on down the list. So we can use XML right here to fetch these comments completely asynchronously. So let's do that. Right. So as we loop through these, let's just say grab a reference to the comments, and just as a placeholder, we'll say like get comments ID. Right, we have the ID. It comes from each result. We need a function that will probably do something similar to this XHR in the first place. Get the thing, and then put replace where it says dash comments with like 5 comments, 4 comments, 3 comments, 7 comments. Okay, and then we know that we're going to make it a link at some point in the future too. But we're like experimenting and playing as we go. Go ahead, Selena.
Okay, so it's minor, but on line 26, does the ending span tag need that little backslash for it?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't sure if it was like okay because it looked like it worked fine, but
it did work fine, but that's just because browsers are very polite and they ignore us writing bad HTML.
Okay. Sounds good.
But now it's good. Thank you for pointing that out. It could have caused problems later, for sure. All right. Okay, so now we're seeing get comments is not defined. So that tells us the next thing we need to do is let's just make a function get comment, and maybe we would actually want to make it be like get comment count. That makes more sense to me. We're just trying to like update this page with a count of the comments. So we'll just say get comment count. All right. So we've made a function. It's being called in each of these loops, but it's not doing anything right now, right? So we're probably going to want to like, what do we want to do here? Right? We don't know that yet. One thing I want to point out is that at this stage, I'd probably come in here and like we'd start looking at, I'd maybe take a look at the network tab, and we can see that like, okay, the first thing we load when we load this page is index.html, then it loads the JavaScript file, then it loads the CSS, then it calls that remote URL posts, and we see this took 28 milliseconds, right? So everything else was super fast, and then this took 28 milliseconds, and then this WebSocket, this is the live reload thing that's behind the scenes, so we can ignore this. But like this is the page load, right? It goes from index to blog to our JavaScript to our CSS, and then on to this remote resource. And we can see that status was 200 there, and it's telling you this was an XML HTTP request. Right? They use XHR here as a shorthand as well. And you can see like this kind of took 26 seconds. So I'm sure that as we start getting those comments, it's going to slow down. So we're here. It's 7:09. We're going to take a quick break and come back and like let's play with comments now and start tying some of this stuff together. Yeah? Cool. All right. 7:10. I'm back at 7:25. How was C++ class?
I had him explain assignment 6, so I know what I need to do.
Okay. What was
instead of like just explaining what I need to do and like showing it to me rather than trying to decipher what they're trying to get at. So
cool.
I took a few screenshots of his examples just in case I can't access his code later.
Outstanding.
But it's dealing with declaring enum and namespace, like before main, if that makes sense.
It does. I don't know what problem 6
Yeah.
says, but I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I have to alter the first assignment that declares letter grades to have it work with namespace enum outside of main instead of doing something inside with it.
Cool. And tomorrow is your SQL test, right?
The practical, yeah, where I got to put the table stuff together. I'm thinking it won't be as hard as I think it will be.
Yeah.
Like the tests that make no sense.
Because you just created a table today, and it threw you for a loop with that foreign key stuff. But like that's all there is to it, really, is creating a couple of tables, setting up the relationships, and if you had to do a foreign key, you kind of know what it looks like now, right? You can at least refer back to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and then inputting the data, like that's what I was going to ask you, is like it wanted me to input those rows with the people, like the information.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just basically you're typing in the stuff? Like you know what the user ID is and you know the product ID, so you know to put those, and that's how you do it?
Yeah, so usually, like ID fields were almost always going to be auto increment. So you're not going to have to know the user ID. It's just whatever the next one is going to be the next higher number. But you're going to know, this is Joe, this is his email address, here's his password. It's like data entry. So if they tell you, like in your example today, where it was like insert 2 people or 2 products, 2 users, whatever, you could have put anything in there. As long as you know how to insert a record, you're good.
Yeah. Can I show you?
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, so it was saying yeah, so user 1, user product 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I assumed this is how they wanted me to input it was this way, like that's user 1, product 2. And
you probably don't want to put default in there.
That's
Yeah, so the cool thing about default is that it's going to be there regardless of if you put it. So what I generally would do is I would say, can you do me a favor and show me what the downloads table looks like?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So download ID, you made that auto increment, right?
Yeah.
And download date is also had the default of now, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the only fields you need to provide is user ID, file name, and product ID. So if you go back to that previous one, right, the cool thing about default, if you do insert into downloads and then you put parentheses in here, you can specify what columns you're putting information into. So you can say insert into downloads, parentheses, user ID, file name, product ID. And then that's the only three things you have to pass to it. So let me show you, like, if I type this to you real quick. So it'd be like insert into downloads, user ID.
Because this would have been the user ID, and this would have been the product ID.
Yeah, so if you don't specify the columns in your insert statement, which you do that right after downloads, then it's going to assume it's the order that it goes in, right? So user ID, download ID, user ID, timestamp, and file name. Yeah, so you have it in the right order. But if you specify the columns, then that's all you have to provide. So if you did this, values 1 Harry Potter, and then what is that? 1 or 2? 2? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So I just sent you. So when you use it with this syntax, yeah, copy and paste. It says insert into downloads into these columns. Because you set up as defaults, you don't even have to provide them. The table itself is going to insert 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's going to insert the current time.
Okay, so I should just change this one and make it look like this, because I think that's what he wants, is this right here. So I'll have to take these out, right?
Yeah, so what you can do is just you can do truncate downloads, and it's going to empty all those records that are in there.
Okay. I can do that later.
Cool.
And then do that there. Okay. Yeah, that's what I was like. Do I have to put it all in?
You can. But yeah, that's what they're asking for. They're saying create these records.
Okay. Sounds good. Do you need to take a break?
No. But
okay.
If you stop talking to me, I'm going to read the news or something.
Oh. That's funny. My brain is going, but then part of it's asleep. I don't know, like part of it's like, and then I'm like, oh, I'm paying attention. It's that in between. It's like, it's weird. I feel fuzzy.
Yeah.
I should not take antihistamines during the day.
All right, so where we left off is that we've loaded all this content. We give ourselves a little element here that if we inspect this, it's a span that has just dash in the comments. Now we've also taken a look that we know how to load stuff from a remote resource, but now we want to, like, as we're doing these loops, we want to have a bunch of extra requests going on, from 0 through 10, so that we can go and find out how many comments are there. So let's just, we gave ourselves a placeholder. So we want to say, create XHR request to get the comments of this ID, and then update and we know we're going to do this inside of the event handler for the page being ready, for the request being ready. Update the comment count for this ID, which is going to be in this format, ID span, or ID comments, right? Is that what we call it? Yeah, ID comments, right? So we have these elements that exist on the page. We created these elements ourselves inside the return from that request, and that's where we created this span. So now we just need to update this value, where right now it says dash comments, and we replace it with however many is there. All right, so let's do this same exact thing, right? So take out what do we want to do here, and we'll say, all right, var, let's do let XHR equals new XML HTTP request, and we'll say XHR dot on ready or on load equals function. We'll put this comment in here, right? Because we know that when we get the response back, we want to update the value. So, it's going to be the same type of thing. So we can just do let results, let comments equals this dot response text, and we'll wrap this in JSON parse as well. JSON.parse, and then just to make sure that we're kind of on the right track, let's do console.log comments. Right, so this should, for every one of these 10 things, we should get an array that tells us something in here. But we also know that it's probably going to be like, okay, get the count, and then update the span. Right, so we've taken our one-liner thing here, this one-line comment telling us what we're doing, and we really turned it into two things. Right, we got the comments, now we need to get the count and then update the span. Okay, but let's just verify this works. So we look at our console. Did it actually? Right. Get comment count. Let's just make. Oh, we never actually sent it, right? So we'll do XHR dot open, and we'll say get, and the URL is this. Right. So let's even use this string templating, right? We can save ourselves some time, because we defined it in our comment in a format that we can turn directly into a string using the backtick string template. We could have just as easily done it like this, right? And then done plus ID plus. Okay, both are the same. And then we'll do XHR.send. All right, and now we can see, yep, we got a whole bunch of things that say 5, 5, 5. For whatever reason, this fake database that we're using, everything's a 5. So, but that's fine. We're running code to be correct, right? So we'll come in here and say, okay, we've got the comments. We know that this is working. Let's do let count equals comments dot length, right? That's our property of our array. Okay, and then we'll do document. Oh, let's use our little handy dandy helper function, get L, and we'll say ID comments dot inner HTML equals, and we'll say count plus comments. Right? So this, yeah. So I don't know if you can kind of see this. It happens really quickly, right? All of those have updated to be 5 comments. Everyone following along? Cool. All right, so now we're at like a really good point where I'm like, all right, we've got a good page. I think now would be a stage where I'd come in and take out my little blank template article. So we'll just assume, we probably want to put something in here that says, we might want to say like comments loading or articles loading. But we can just give ourselves an HTML comment that says like articles will be loaded from the server here, right? Just so we know that this is intentionally empty, right? Our page is, our XML HTTP request object is creating all of these articles. Okay. You guys have seen websites before. What if I wanted to read these comments and read this page, right? There's presumably like we want to be able to interact with these articles and view the comments. So the next thing that really jumps to mind is that we probably want to make it so that if we click on the H2, that it loads, it replaces everything in this main box with the page and the comments of that page, right? We want to turn this into some kind of link, right? And traditionally it would be like href equals whatever article, and then ID. Right? This is generally what you would do if we were writing the back end, right? So that each of these is a link that we can click on. This one's article 1. This one's article 2. This one's article 3. Okay. The challenge is because we are not, because we're using like a fake server and we haven't learned back-end programming, We don't know how to do that yet, right? We don't know how to like actually make a page called article that will give us all these values, right? Because if we go to article 3 right now, right, on this little fake server, it's going to tell us cannot get article 3. Okay? When we learn backend, we'll be able to tell JavaScript, hey, when you get a request that matches the word article, instead of sending back an HTML page, send back this data. But for now, we can use some of the techniques we've been learning to just swap out content. So maybe what we do by default is we say, class equals article link, right? So we've added a class to this so that we know we can trap these elements. We can trap the request. So let's do that. We know that the entire page is inside a thing that says section articles. So let's write one. Event handler that looks for if the target is an anchor tag that has a class of article title, article link. We're gonna not let it go to that page. So let's do that first. So let's take a note here for ourselves, right? And what we can do is, because we are already inside this DOM content loaded function, let's just say, let's maybe come in here and say like event handlers, right? Let's give ourselves like a little area to do stuff. So we'll say document, or we'll use getL, and we'll say, what do we call it? Article link? No, that's not what we want. That's the name of the thing. Just put this in here so you don't lose it. It's articles. That is our parent container. Dot add event listener. We'll say we're going to look for any click, and we'll say function e. We'll make this event so that it's clearer. We'll say if the event target is an article link, do not navigate away. Instead, replace the articles section with our article and comments. Okay? Everyone kind of following along with our logic, our train of thought here? All right. So we know we have event.target, so let's just get that element. We'll say let L equals event.target. Right? If we console.log this, it's going to tell us what we clicked on. So clicking on this, anywhere in this page, if we had our element up, right? You can see I'm getting paragraphs, I'm getting this, I'm getting the span tag, but all I care about is if I click on this, right now it's going to do something, but if I clicked on this, it would say anchor tag with whatever that class is that we said article link. So let's do this. Let's do if el dot class name equals article link, right? Does anyone remember how we prevent the default behavior from happening?
Just prevent default.
Let's try that, yeah. Event.prevent default. Okay? And let's see what the prevent default. If invoked when a cancelable attribute value is true, while executing a listener for the end. Okay. Signals the operation. So if we do this now, let's just maybe say like console.log clicked a link, right? We might have to jump through a few extra steps. Okay, perfect. We don't. So you can see now when I click on this, it prevents this from going to the page. Okay, perfect. So this is exactly the right way to go. I probably, just to be extra safe, I might even come down here and say like return false, but because we don't want to do that yet, we'll just leave it out. It's working as intended. Everybody's happy. I probably also now that I'm working on these links, I don't like this color. This is the default color blue. So let's just change this to we'll come in here and say like we'll say color RGB, say like 000, right? I know I don't really want to use that color, but we're going to use the color picker. So let's make it blue, but like a light blue. Okay. Cool. So I could do it. All right. Now we're getting somewhere, right? These look like links. I click it, and it doesn't do anything. Okay. Exactly what we want. But we do know what we want to do, right? Like, okay, replace the articles section with our article and comments, right? This same comment that was up here. So we got this part done. If event target is article link, do not navigate away. Just put that in there. Okay, so we got our click handler. And now we want to replace the article section with our article and comments. So the very first thing that we can think of is we probably need to get the, right? So we know that we put in the link to the article ID, right? It's in the anchor, right? So like console.log el.href, right? So when I click on this, it's going to say article 1, article 2, right? We already have all the information we need here to like do stuff with it, right? So we just want to change this so that it says, so that the string is just the ID. We need this last value. Does anyone know how we might do that using some of our string methods? Or let's try this even maybe. Console.log el.get attribute href. Let's see what this gives us. That's even cleaner, right? It doesn't give us the full URL. If we use get attribute. So maybe let's do that instead of this. So I want to get that value at the end. We know that this says like /article/ and then the ID that we want. Leah, how would I just get this ID out of here? So we do var let article ID equals el.get el.get attribute href. Right now this is if I log this, right, it's going to say article 1. Let's take out this log statement as well. Okay. I need to turn this into just the number 1, or the number 2, or the number 3.
Char at.
Char at. So that's going to tell me what? So let's make a string here. We'll just play with it. Var, art ID equals article 3. Art ID dot char at. It's a function, and it tells me I can put in a position. So let's put in 3. It's going to tell us a letter. We want to just maybe exclude this. Do we see anything in here that we can maybe count on always being there?
Is it split?
Could we use a?
Is it? What did you say, Leah?
Split?
Oh yeah, split would be a good one to try. What do we want to split on?
The slash.
All right, let's try that. And so now we have an array that has nothing because it splits on this first one, then a thing, the word article, and then the number. That seems reasonable to me. Does anyone have any other disagreements? So we do art ID dot split 2. It's always going to give us the number.
Would this be a situation where you could also use a regular expression to extract what you needed?
Yeah, absolutely. I will tell you that regular expressions will be slower than doing split. So regular expression is like a full parsing engine behind the scenes, and so we could write a regular expression that would go like art.id.find or exec, right? Oh, it's on. We have to make the regular expression, so it'd be like /d plus g dot exec art ID, right? And that is going to give us, the number 3 as our match. If this was, let's see, if we had art ID equals article, article, 1032, right? If this was what our article was, like, that would still work, right? So you could use a regular expression, but this is going to be significantly slower than just splitting and saying, give me the whatever's at the end of this. But yeah, exactly. You could do it either way. Good suggestion, Andrew.
Splitting seems a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, if we've got something like URLs like this, where we know we just want one part of this, URLs are a great thing to use split with because they're almost always going to have some kind of /. Now, that's not always the case, right? You might have to pull out a regular expression. You might have to do something more complicated in the future. But you know, the problem could have been like if this was like, right? So article ID slash, you know, comment 4, which we're gonna you know, be working with URLs that look like this in a minute. If we use just this existing one, right? Like we're looking for, I should have done D dot, right? D dot, right? Oh, plus. Because our ID has that. Yeah, so you know, it's possible that we've written a regular expression that would have captured that 4 as well at the end. You know, the one we wrote is pretty good. This is finding the first one.
I think that's my biggest problem with some of the more complicated stuff, like regular expressions, because like usually there's a simpler way to do
Yeah.
the things that I can think of, so I don't really get that practice with them.
Yeah, and to be like completely honest with you, if you can't do it with a simpler way, that's when you'd pull out a regular expression. But there's almost always a simpler way, and that's why, like, in all of the positions I've ever had where I've done regular expressions heavily, it was because I was processing large amounts of text and extracting a bunch of different little bits of pieces of value out of it. And so you'd use the regular expressions kind of as like a filter to help you like pick out little bits and pieces that matched a certain template. Just because it's easier to write it in one line rather than the JavaScript way where we have to like read it line by line and parse it ourselves. So, but we're pretty happy with split, right? So let's start building that version. So let's just make sure that we're doing this correctly. Split, and then we know that it was the second attribute, right? So if I click on any of these now, I should get a number. 1, 2, 3, right? So that's working. All right. So what we have to do here, right? So we're looping through this array of all the articles, and then we're calling get comment count, which was updating the comments. But we added an event listener to our articles element, which is this one that's here with a white border. And if what we click on is a thing that has a class of article link, instead of using it as a link, we're gonna get the article ID and then replace the article section with our article and the comments. Right. So this probably actually needs to be up here, right? So we'd probably want to give a comment that says like get the current article ID. Right. That was what we did there. We can stop logging that to the console so that we know this is correct now. We might want to put this in here, split, right? Because we can chain things together, and we'll say 2. So we've got the article ID, and now what we need to do is we need to make, fetch the info with XHR. So we'll say let XHR equals new XML HTTP request, and we'll say let XHR.onLoad equals function. Right, so this is what's going to happen when everything's done. We'll do XHR.open and XHR.send. Right, we don't know what we're doing yet with these, but we are going to come in here and say, load the article, then load the comments, then display both. Right. So that's kind of the flow we're gonna need to do in here. And then the problem is, we know that this is going to be like another async request. Right? So we're inside one XML HTTP request. We have one specific article, but when we click on this, it's going to load the article by itself using this kind of, right? So posts. Instead of all the posts, we're going to load just one post, and then instead of all the, you know what we can do even, right? Because we already have this in our results object, right? It has everything in here, right? We got, if I clicked on article 5, right? I already have this value. We don't need to go get it again. We just need to load the comments and then display them, right? So we can even simplify this. So we already have the article, so we'll say grab article out of results array, and then load the comments, so we'll say that this XHR is load the comments with XHR. Load the comments with XHR. And then display both. Right, so we're just going to replace the article page with those comments that we return from here. So we know we're going to do get, and we know our article, our URL here is this plus ID plus comments. So let's just boop, boop. Okay. And then we're going to send, right? So we grab the result, we grab the comments. Yep. So that's this. So instead of being another asynchronous request, this is the only thing we're doing. We're grabbing the comments. So let's just get our, let's just say, article equals, okay, yep. So we'll say let article equals results. Is that what we named it? Yeah, results. Yeah. Oh, so this is an array. This is not an object. So let's make this an array. Okay. Good. So let article equals results, and then we'll say ID. Okay, good. And then we'll say, right, so, you know, this dot response text is going to have our comments in it. So let's just say let comments equals, and we'll do JSON dot parse. Okay. And then we really want to just like document dot get element. We can use our get L, and we'll say articles dot inner HTML. Rather than including all of them, we'll say equals, and then we'll say some content here from our API. Right. So anytime I click this now, we're making the XML HTTP request, but we're going to just quickly replace. ID is not defined. Okay, so this is a problem. We have to figure this out. So when we click on this, oh, it's article ID. Article. Right? We'll click on this. Where is the ID yet? Oh, article ID. Do it again. Cool. So we've replaced the entire page with some content here from our API, and if we look at the network down here, we can see. Let's maybe show this off. Right. This is where we got up to, right? We loaded the posts, and then for each post, we loaded the comments request to see how many were there. And then if we clear this, you can see that as soon as I click this, it's making another request to comments, which is returning that array of comments that we want to display. Okay. We probably want to like look at these to see what the comments are. Like they're going to have a body, they're going to have an email, they have an ID. I don't know what the name field is supposed to be. That's maybe like the name of the comment, I guess. Interesting. Cool. Is everyone following along? You following the flow of what we're trying to build here? All right. So everything is exactly as we expect. All right. Where is, there we go. All right. So we probably want this type of format. We want this to be the same, right? We want this because this is good. And we already have this because that's what the article is, right? So let's just make an output variable. So we'll say let output HTML equals, right, nothing. And then as we're going through here, we're going to say output HTML equals, or plus equals, and we'll put in this thing, right? So that's the current. Right. This is what we currently had, so it's article, H2, whatever. And then below it, we're going to want more output. So as we've got these comments, right, this is an array, and so we're going to want to loop through this. So we'll say for var I, let I equals 0, I is less than comments dot length, I plus plus. Okay. So now this is going to loop through every comment that was returned back in our XHR. Right, and then we're just going to build onto the output HTML. So let's just test this out. Output HTML plus equals, and we'll maybe just say let's just say like section. Let's just do div class equals comment, ID equals comment I. Right, so we can just keep track of where we're at when we got these elements that we're putting in here. And then we're going to say, just to, what did it have it called? It was like body, right? So the result, the comments I body. So we'll do comments I dot body, and then we close our div. Okay, so we're creating a blank string. We've put in that same article format that we had before, but maybe we want this not to have a link, right? Because if we're on the page, we don't need a link to the page. Then we put in a whole bunch of divs of comments that are going to go below that article. And then we're going to just simply put in output HTML. Article and comments. Now the one thing I noticed is that down here, when we're doing this, we went out of our way to get these values, so we probably need to get these as well. Because our article is this thing here, but we don't have all those values. So we actually probably just need to say results article ID body, or we could have done it as because we got an individual reference. Let's say article dot body, article dot title, and article dot ID. Okay, so let's test this out. We've theoretically built a page that when we click on this, it's going to replace everything below this with this title and comments. Oh, and it didn't. That's annoying. What did it do differently? Well, it did replace the title. That's good. Let's see, did we get an error when we did this? Ooh, I see what happened. All right. Does anyone know what is different, right? I clicked on the one, and I got this one. I clicked on one, and I got this one. Any thoughts? Any theories? If I click on this one, I'm going to get this one.
Because it started, because of index 0, it's skipping ahead one?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The article ID is article ID 1, but it's in our 0th position. So we can fix that really easily, right? We can just do let article equals article ID plus 1. That's simple. Now if I click this, right, did it work? Oh, excuse me, minus 1, right? We want to go backwards. So if I click, yeah, that worked perfectly. But our comments aren't loading, which is interesting. So let's, wait, is this correct? Article ID, open, article ID, comments. Let's just go to this page and see if it works. And let's replace article ID with number 1. Okay, we are getting comments. So let's just come in here and just make sure that we're getting something here. Let's do console.log this. Maybe we're this dot response text. Yeah, that's there. This dot response text. Click on that. Yeah, we're getting our. That's correct, right? And let's just make sure that let's just console.log comments and see what we get. Comments. Clear. Let's clear this out. Right? And we're getting an array. It has a length of 5. Oh, this is probably broken. Yeah, I bet you if we inspect this element right here, we're going to see a bunch of broken divs maybe. Article. No, so our output array is not working. So let's see if we can figure this out. All right, we got comments. That was working. If we click on this, we can see that we have an array here. So let's just make sure that we're in here looping. Let's say console.log comment plus I. Now let's clear this and click. Okay. Comment 0, 1, 2, 4. So that's good. Why is output HTML broken? Maybe this is incorrect? Let's just make this a new variable. Let body equals and comments I body. And instead of this, we'll say body. Maybe it doesn't like arrays in there for some reason. No, still not working. That's weird. We know we have, right? We have 0. So let's, I guess while we're looping here, let's console.log comments I. Just make sure this is actually working. Clear. Body's there. That's weird. Let's try logging that out. Right. Alright, we're getting all the information. Output HTML. It's right here. And we're saying the inner HTML of the articles equals output HTML. So let's just, right before we do this, let's console.log output HTML. Right. Clear. There's our article. And we have a div class comment. Oh, I see it. We're missing a double quote here. So it was breaking our HTML. Right? So attention to detail. I missed one little thing and it was breaking. Okay, perfect. So now we have some comments, right? Obviously these are unstyled and they look terrible. So let's fix that real quick. And let's say div.comment. What do we call it? Comment? Yep. And we will say margin 5px, 25px. Right, so let's make this, and then we'll do background color 555. Okay. Cool. So now we have each individual comment kind of spread out here. See what we did here? All right. Other things that we have in here, we're probably going to want to make these comments a little bit better, right? Each comment has an author. Each comment has its own individual item. So let's take a look at what this API returns to us. All right, let's clear out all these logging statements we put in here. Now that we have it working. But the one we do want to output, let's console.log comments so that we can see this this array in action. We'll say, all right, we got name. I don't know what name is supposed to be, but maybe that's supposed to be like a title of the comment. So let's assume that's the case. So let's maybe use h3, and we'll say name. Let's call it title because I don't know why they would call it name. And then let's wrap this in a paragraph tag as well. So let's say let title equals comments I dot name. And now we can see, it has a subject and has a whatever. I would have assumed that if this was truly a comment, right, but there'd probably be something like the current date or something like that. We also see that we have like the email address of the person who wrote it. Now, we probably, as programmers, would not want to display the user's email address onto the page. We'd probably want to just say like, this is the user, Megan. And we'd probably have a user ID. And there is a users table that probably is a better association here. But we don't want to just display our user's email address. They probably gave it to us in confidence. Like this is their account information, how they log into the system. So we're probably not going to put that on here. Maybe the name field was intended to be like her name. And they just picked generic fake lorem ipsum text. Cool. So one thing that jumps out, now that we have kind of the start of a blog with comments here, or like a news site with articles and comments, we've got this page that has been replaced with content. We have no way to go back to like the main page, so maybe we need something like that. Yeah, so let's just start taking some notes for ourselves. We'll say returns a count and updates the main page. Probably need a return to main page function. And it's probably, if we think about it, like to do refactor our default loading behavior, right? So we already have all this stuff that's happening, right? When the DOM content is loaded, we are already, that's like what's creating all this information. This probably needs to be in like a load main page function, so that when we load the page, by default it's there, but we want to give ourselves a link in here that will let us go back to it. Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so that's maybe the first thing we'll do. So, yep, call articles API. Let's take this out. And we'll just say like load main page. Go ahead, Andrew.
So is there a way to go back to that point in the page? Like, let's say you have 1,000 comments and you scroll down to read comment 150, and you go back to the main page and you're automatically at the beginning, rather than jumping back to where you just were on the page, so you can maybe look at comment 151.
I don't quite understand the question. So we have 1,000 comments, we're scrolling down. You were saying...
So have you ever been on a page and you scroll really far down the page, and then you hit back, and then instead of back the point on the page where you were previously, it goes to the very top of the previous page?
Yes. We can do that already in a number of different ways. One of them is we know how to link to parts inside of pages with the anchor tag, with an A tag. So we can say A name equals whatever and jump straight to a spot. Yeah. So we'd probably want to put anchor tags all over the place, so that if we're navigating forwards and backwards like this, we can go to where we were. We would just have to store a copy of where we were.
Okay, I guess that's my question is, would you want to do that with anchor tags? Like for every anchor, you go to this comment, you have a reverse anchor to go back to that same spot on the page? Or
perhaps. I think in the case of like a news system like this, I'd probably just assume that if I'm going back, I'm just going to go back to the previous page. Like, maybe what it would make sense is that, like, when we build pagination, right, we've only displayed 10 things here. We might have a whole bunch of things that says go to page 2, go to page 3. If I click on an article, we don't want it to go back to page 1, we want to go back to page 3, right? And so we might, when we build pagination, put that in so that when we click, if we build like a back button up here, it takes us back to page 3 instead of page 1. So let's maybe take that as a to-do for ourselves, right? Like as we're doing load main page, maybe this just needs to say load page, and it needs to have a page number, right? And we by default says like let page equals page 1, right? Like to do implement pagination, and then also to do make sure we load the previous the page we were on when we go back from an article. Right, so I'd maybe take a note like this. I don't think I would build that right off the bat, because it probably doesn't make sense until we're at pagination. And I don't think I would necessarily use an anchor tag because I'm not jumping into the page. But I think it's important to go back to the page I was at. So I think that's a good pattern. But just to be completely future safe in all of these things, like if this is the load page thing, these are all the articles are in here. I might even just come in here and just by default say like a name equals article ID ID, so that no matter what, I have that anchor there and I can choose to use it in the future. Right, so if I save this, right, and I load, I change the name of the page, load page 1. Right, so each of these elements now has an anchor tag at the very top of it. with a name. So I could always go to like, article ID 7, right? And it's going to take me to that spot. I might want to keep a reference to that so I know where I came from. And maybe we'll build that next. So we know we have 5 comments. I probably also want to make it, if you think of like if you guys are ever familiar with Reddit, right? Like they also let you click on either the title of the article or the comments word itself. So maybe what we do is when we load the comments, right, get comment count, we're doing this, maybe we want to take a to-do, turn this into a link, right? Maybe that makes sense as well. And then instead of just count, it would be like, a href equals whatever, but we'd have to make sure that we put in that class name as well. It was like class equals article link. Href equals, article plus count plus whatever, or excuse me, ID, right? So I'd probably do something like that as well. Okay, cool. So we've got our load page function. We just took that out of the DOM. We were just calling this when we loaded the page. I know that we're going to want to build pagination, so I gave ourselves a page thing. We took some notes to do this in the future. And now our XHR is doing this. So in theory, we could do, if we wanted to, right, we could make this assumption now. We could say let I equals page, and we could say, right, so if it's page 1, we're starting at index 0. If it's page 2, we're starting at index 10, right? So we can just do page equals page minus 1, right? So if I put in page 1, I want this to be 0. And then instead of let I can do let I equals page. And then I can do page plus 10, right? So if I say I want page 1 here, it's going to turn page into 0. And then when we get to our for loop, it's going to say I is 0. I is less than 0 plus 10, which is 10. If I put in 2, it'll say page is, that breaks it, right? So we need to do, so this math is incorrect. What would be the math to do pagination like this correctly? If we're at page 2, we want to start at 10. If we're at page 3, we want to start at 30, right? So maybe we just, is there a simple one-liner of math that anyone can think of that will give us this kind of correct result? This part is good. Whatever, we want to get our page index. We're going 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, right? So we could probably just do page times 10. Oh, page times 10, right? So if I put in page 2, it'll give us 20. But the challenge is if page equals 1, page equals 0. Else, if I put in 2, then that math works perfectly. Okay. So our to-do of implement pagination is kind of done now, right? And we can test this real quick by pulling up our developer tools, and we can say load page 2 should load a whole bunch of different content. Did it though? Load page 3. I don't know.
Did you mean to do times 10?
Yeah, did I not?
Yeah, you did times 1.
Oh, yep, thank you. Times 10, perfect. Let's test it. Load page 2. Let's just log some stuff out. Maybe all these articles do actually say the same. It's kind of junk data here that we're working with. So ID1 is sent out something. Let's go look at 10. No, yeah, so we should see something like, right, so this is 0, 1, 2, 3. So let's just loop through our titles whenever we do the page load. Right, so I equals page. I is less than page plus 10. Yeah. So let's console.log title. So clear all this, right? And then we'll do load page 2. Yeah, we're getting different stuff. So, because we did plus equals. So we probably need to do this at the start of load page, right? Because we are adding, right? All it's doing is we've created like infinite scroll. So it was adding it to the bottom. And if we did load page 3, right, you can see now that those were loaded below here as well. So that's, all right, we've accidentally come up with infinite scrolling, but we probably want to just for now replace it. So let's say the first thing we do is, let's just clear this out. We'll say get L, and what is the name of that thing? Articles. Inner HTML equals, right? So it's like clear the page so that we are always fresh. Okay. So if I do load page 2, right? Now I'm on to page 2, then on to page 3, and on to page 4. Now the problem is, and we took a note about this. Load page, 50, right? There is, the API only has 100 records in it, and so we're gonna have to trap that at some point. But but we now have a function that we can use to load chunks of 10 articles from this array that comes back from our server, right? And that is working pretty well. I'd probably leave a comment here and be like, this helps our loop below handle pagination. The only edge case is that page 1 needs to use the 0th index, right? Just so we have a note that says if someone comes in here and reads this, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, we're dealing with an array that starts at 0. That's why we did this little weird if block. Okay, and then we have a to-do for ourselves later that says make sure we load the page we're on when we go back to an article. But this probably needs to be, okay, so even to just like prepare to make this happen, let's just say current page equals page. Oh, but we probably need to do this before, right? So we'll say current page equals page. And maybe what we want to do is, because page is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like pages of content, we don't want to cheat like this. We want to just create a let I equals 0. Right? Let article index equals 0. And then we'll say if page is greater than 1, article index equals page times 10. So now our code is cleaner, and in here we say article index, and we don't use let. We don't even need this. We can just do empty article index is less than page plus 10. Ooh, article index plus 10, right? And then we'll do article index plus plus, and then article index I. Right, so instead of using I, which we defined in the beginning of our for loop, maybe we put in a comment here to ourselves and say uses article index for pagination. Right, so that we know we're not defining a new variable, we're using one we already built. And we know that this is working. We don't have to log this anymore. Yep, everything's good. We've gotten rid of all of our help. Good. So instead of that previous stuff where we were overriding the page variable, we just want to make sure that page, we're going to want some, let current page equals 1. We'll say start on page load with the first 10 articles, right? And so now every time we click load page, as long as we didn't have an error in here, cannot read body of undefined. Where does this come from? Article index. Oh, we need to make this. We need to make this global as well because it's not available. So we'll say let article index equals 0. why are we getting an undefined error? Article index body is undefined, but only once. Does unload? Let's try window, not article index. Window index. Window. 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 And a window. Alright, so we're forcing it to use the global variable. And I think that should fix it. Yep. Nope. It did not. Broke it worse. Probably because we have to use var here. This is one of the downsides to all this fancy stuff. Still giving us that error though. That's interesting. Let's just console.log while we're in here. Console.log article index. And we'll even maybe say index is plus. Index is, so it's working until it gets to index is 100. Oh. Wait, why are we leaping through all of them? This is every article. We're supposed to just load page 1. So we got something wrong with our math here. Page times 10. Page is 1 times 10. Page equals page. If page is greater than 1, article index equals page times 10. Why is it doing 1,000? So let's just come in here and see, like, on, load. Let's get rid of this. Let's just do console.log. What is article index? Plus article index. And let's, just because this is driving me crazy too, let's go into our comments function and take out that log so we know that the comment count was working. What is article index 0? So index is, right? And so in here where we are doing our loop, article index is 0. And then we say, while article index is less than article index plus 10, so 0 to 10, article index plus plus. And we say article index is, and then we link through it. Great. Then we get the comment count, which does another XML/HTTP request, gets the information, and does the stuff. So what is happening here that is causing this to break? Index is, interesting. It should have stopped at 10. Let's just, let's hard code this to 10 and see if it stops. So it's less than 10.
Does that semicolon need to be there
Which
after
one?
the comment?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't sure.
And the reason is each of these sections, like if we said let I equals 0, like this runs the very first time and lets us define variables if we wanted to. This is the condition that's checked, and this is an incrementing section. So it's going to run every loop and change something.
So it'll work anyway, even with the comment there?
Yep. So like one of the, because we used a comment that was like self-contained. If we had done like the regular comment syntax / it would comment out the whole line, but we did the multi-line comment, which did, it's just in between those two. And so I could put in like hi. So this works now. The problem is article index, when we did, let's do article index plus 10. Oh, I bet you I know what it's doing. This is running every time, and it's maybe adding? That doesn't make any sense. Let's do bars. Let's do let stop at index equals article index plus 10. So let's do console.log we stop at, and then plus stop at index, right? And then instead of doing this, we'll say while article index is less than stop at index. Interesting. We stop at 10. If we do load page 2, we stop at 30. Now everything's working. So for whatever reason, when we were doing article index plus 10, this was adding every single time, which doesn't make any sense. So we'll do console.log article index. That's weird. I've never seen this before. Alright, well, we fixed it through some ingenuity, right? We created this stop at variable. Stop at index. So that it only runs once. And now we have a thing that lets us load content in pages. Load page 2, load page 3, and it doesn't create any errors until we went to something like load page 10, right? Which doesn't exist yet, right? So that's, we're gonna have to fix it eventually. But for now, we're at a good place. Load page 1. Okay. All right. So that is where we're at. We click on a thing, it loads the comments page. And this is all happening in real time. Like we're fetching a server every time I click on one of these, right? Like load page 2, for example. If I click on this, it's actually going to make requests behind the scenes to a server that we can track and see how long. This took 40 milliseconds. That's extremely fast, right? Faster than you can blink. But if this was slow, then it would have not been so fast, right? So. Any questions of what we've done so far? We've done some complicated things for sure, and we got kind of sidetracked trying to make pagination because Andrew wanted us to go back to where we were, which is interesting. We've got a current page value, right? So if we went to load page 5, right? Current page is 5. So on this page, we can then say, we can make a go back link that would take us to page 5. So let's do that next. And we'll just do this really simply, right? We've got our function that loads the comments, right? This one. This probably needs to be its own function as well instead of an anonymous one inside the click. Because right now this is where we're doing all that article building. That's probably crazy too, right? But just for the sake of like showing how we probably start to do this, I'd maybe come in here and say class equals go back. And then we'll say go back to articles page, and then we can even show like right, like current page, right? So if I click on this, it'll say back to articles page 1. Back to articles page 1. But if I do load page 7. I click on one of these, back to articles page 7. So we're going to want to capture this so that when we click on it, it goes there. Right? And we would do that the exact same way we did this, really. Right? Like, if it's an article link, do this thing. So maybe that's the first thing that we should do, right? It's like function to load the full comments article page, right? And all we need to do here is everything that was inside this, right? If the L was this class name, we just put this in a function, right? So we'll probably want to do prevent default here. We want to get the current like almost really from here, right? So we want to still get the article ID so we can pass that to the function. So we'll just grab this whole thing and put this in function load article, and then we say article ID and put all that in here. Let's make it line up nicely. Right, so everything that was in our click handler before is now in this function. So we can say load article, and then we put in article ID. Okay, so now everything still works. But then we want to say if the EL, else if el.className equals, what do we call it, back? Go back. Right? We don't even have to call a special function because we already have that one written. Right? We can do load page, and then we say, we have to grab the value, right? So we already know. Here, let's just let's do this. We already have the event object, like event.target. So we probably want to put in here something that we can just grab, like, we could grab this current page off the end of this, but it's probably just easier to come in here and say something like data previous page equals current page. Because when we click on this, right, if I inspect this page, this is the data attribute that we know that we can use JavaScript to grab from that event, from that attribute. Right? So we can go get L. All right, we already have it. Right? Event.target data set what do we call it? Previous page equals, or that's the value. We can do let page num equals, right? So we grab the previous page and then we click this page num. So the function that we wrote that lets us load the page in the first place, we can just reuse this here. Reusability is one of the big reasons we use functions in the first place, and this exactly is why we point it out. Like we already did all the hard work making this load page stuff work. Now we've added, just by adding a simple href in here, right? We probably want to put in an href as well. Href article, maybe we say like articles, and then we do current page. We added a simple anchor tag in here that now when we click on this link, right, back to articles page 1, you can see if you look kind of down here in the bottom of this page, this is going to articles page 1, but we're preventing default, and if I click on this, it's going to page 1. If I go to load page 7 or 8, I guess, and I click on Placiat whatever, right, and I click on this button, it's going to take me back to page 8. And maybe just to even highlight that, we would go in here and say, because we've got this load page function, at the very top, we can just maybe say like span page, current page. Right. And let's make this a, right, span. And then the problem is, we call current page down here, so let's move this down below it. And then tidy this up a bit. And now, you can see we're on page 1. If I go to load page, 6. I scroll down a little bit, I click on this. Right? This link says back to articles page 6. If I click it, it goes right back to page 6. And we built all that with very little fuss and muss. And then, down at the bottom of this page, we probably want to make like a pagination. So we'd have to take a look at the total length of our articles array, which in this case is 100, divide it by the total page count, which is 10, and so that we know we've got 10 total pages. And so we could just kind of do like a cutesy little Google thing. Maybe we want to just say next page, next page, next page. We might want to make each letter clickable. We might want to make each number clickable. It's entirely up to us. But we've made a blog type system completely powered by a server that we don't control, and all we consumed was their content using XML HTTP request. We wrote, even including comments, like 144 lines of code, and we are pulling data and displaying it on our page from somebody else's server. And in the future, when we start learning about our own server programming next week on the back end and things, like, we're going to have the full control to write both the API itself and what the front end looks like. So in your example, Andrew, when you're building a golf app, you're going to say like get holes, and it's going to return a list of all the user data for a hole, and then you'll say like get hole 14, and it's going to return the info for hole 14, and then when you save it, it would post it out. Any questions? Anything we want to look at in more depth? We've used XML HTTP request in like 15 different ways, and this is super critical. I love XML HTTP request. It makes a ton of sense to my mental brain. You can also use fetch, which we kind of explored a little bit, and we'll probably look at a little bit more next week. It's going to be very similar in structure, except for the fact that it uses promises instead of callbacks. So, we would have to we might have to re-architect things a little bit, but like when you're in your final thing, you get your JSON here, instead of just returning console.log, this is a function, so we could have written all these functions exactly this way as well. Any questions?
Would you post that link in Slack so we can look at it tonight?
This one?
Or the everything you just did?
Oh, yeah, the code and stuff.
Yeah, the code for the blog page.
Yeah, let's. Right, we spent all this time building it. Let's upload it to GitHub. I'm gonna click this publish to GitHub. Yep. We'll make it public so that you guys can see it, and everything is there. And then if we go to GitHub. So this is the page. I will paste it right now. Bloop. All right, and then I think that this JSON placeholder is a super cool website too. I've never used this before, but it was really easy to like play with. So it has some other data objects in here, like users, right? This is a very good structure of like what you're going to see in a user's object. We've been kind of playing with users as an example in our code in previous weeks, but you're often going to have like a full name, a username, an email address, maybe an address is a sub object. You'll probably have a phone number of some kind. It's just what you would kind of expect to see out of a user object. So you could very easily start mocking up some of the stuff like in Leah, in your app, when you're building the poker or blackjack or card games or something. You could build a profile page that assumes that we know backend programming when we haven't learned that yet. Same, Straya, you could start using, you could use their posts mechanism as like some of your story generator concepts so that you don't have to provide all those stories. You can build the functionality, and then when we learn about databases, you just plug in your own. So this is a cool resource. I've never used it, but it was very, very fun. Any other comments or questions? Anything else you want to explore in more detail? Does anyone have anything they want to show off that they've worked on in their projects or their portfolio maybe?
I've done a little bit, but not really anything like worth showing.
Nothing major that we haven't seen?
I made it to where like whenever you make a new card, it automatically gets smaller. So you can like have like infinite cards down at the bottom.
Very cool.
And it like kind of works on mobile.
All right, well tonight I'm going to make another homework assignment that is similar to the one we did today where we loaded pages with buttons. And it will be pulling stuff from this fake API system, and we'll pick one of these other ones, and it will be similar to what we did here in this exercise where it's loading articles. Maybe this one is like loading the albums array or something, right? Albums, which has photos in it, and so maybe we have you make like a Pinterest type of clone, or some kind of Flickr, or one of these types of things. and we'll do that for tomorrow. That'll be our big project. I think we're going to keep hitting on XML HTTP requests because you're going to use it over and over and over again. And then when it's appropriate, as we start learning backend stuff, we might start switching over to the fetch function. But they're doing literally the same thing, just with a different syntax. So my problem is I don't even think to use fetch because I'm so good at the XML HTTP stuff. So a lot of newer developers prefer fetch because they like promises more than callbacks. It's going to come down to style preferences more than anything else. All right, I'm going to stop the recording and we can just chat for a few minutes or